Okay, let's get into it.
All right, we're gonna dive in.
So, Rick wrote a terrific book in 2017 called The End of Loyalty. And in that book, you also talk about Walmart.
Yes.
And what made you decide, I mean, in that book you talked about how Walmart, how many workers at Walmart cannot earn a decent living. They live in poverty even though they work for the biggest company in America. So what made you decide to write this particular book?
Yeah.
And here it is. It is called Still Broke, and it is about Walmart.
Yeah. So my history with Walmart actually goes way back. I was in your stomping grounds. I was the business editor of the LA Times back in 2003. And my team did a real deep dive, wrote a 3-part series called The Walmart Effect that went on to win a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting in 2004. And what we took a look at really was kind of both sides of the ledger, right? On one side, Walmart brought quality goods at really affordable prices to lots and lots of Americans, so much so that a lot of economists credited it with single-handedly holding down the U.S. inflation rate, right? So amazing. And people benefited every time they got those low prices and walked to, into the checkout line at a Walmart. But there was, on the other side of the ledger, kind of a high human cost of those low prices. And we looked at both sides of that equation. And we're pretty unsparing in our analysis of those high human costs, including the fact that, a typical Walmart worker certainly, couldn't sustain a family on the wage that he or she was earning at the company. Flash forward 2017, The End of Loyalty comes out, and again, I took a very critical view of the company. I held up Walmart as kind of a paragon in many ways of what I saw and see as, kind of a latter 20th century, 21st century model of capitalism, which put elevated shareholders over workers. And so again, was very critical of the company, as you know. But somewhere along the way, in about 2018, my relationship with the company took some of a twist. So I work at the Drucker Institute. We began working on a lifelong learning project, a workforce development platform now called Bendable. And Walmart turned out to be one of the early funders of that project, along with Google and some others. I was pretty taken aback when we got funding, philanthropic funding from Walmart's corporate foundation. I thought, man, maybe they're trying to buy me off or something like.
They didn't read your book.
Something like that. Oh, they had read the book. They clearly knew who I was. But we found some common ground on the importance of worker training and so on. They ended up funding the project. Long story short, whatever their motive, and I believe it was a good one to fund a good and worthy project, it gave me a new window inside the company. And so I started to meet people, and I was surprised. Many they identified as progressive, certainly more liberal than I would have imagined politically. Many said they went into the company to be change agents and to try and change the world from the inside, particularly in terms of how Walmart was treating its frontline workers. And indeed, starting in 2015, the company had begun to raise its starting pay and pay across the board for its frontline workers. I got intrigued and said, hey, something interesting is going on here. And so I approached the company and I said, hey, who better to tell this story and give you your due on the positive changes you're making than somebody who's been a critic for so long? And I said, but if I'm going to do this, I need a couple things. I need access, something they really hadn't given to a journalist before. And I'm going to give you your due, but I'm going to pull no punches, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat any shortcomings that I find. I'm going to talk to all your critics, and I'm going to come to my own truth. And the result is the book that you see here.
So did you change your mind about the company after 2 years of reporting?
I did, in many ways. So, the book really traces how and why Walmart came to raise its wages, its starting wage. It upped kind of an across-the-board increase. The first time it had ever done that was in 2015, since its founding in 1962. At the time, in 2015, the average starting wage at Walmart was $7.65 an hour, barely over the federal minimum wage then and now of $7.25 an hour, which is its own outrage in my view. And they upped their wage to $9 and then $10 in this kind of two-step process. They've continued to raise that starting wage. It's now $12 an hour minimum. They've raised wages, for many other roles. Their average wage now, hourly wage, is over $17 an hour. They've changed the mix, so there are more full-timers, fewer part-timers. They've invested in training. They've improved benefits. They've done lots of really positive things, and I detail the hows and whys they came to that in the book, and we can get into that. There were, I think, all kinds of motives and motivations for doing that. But yeah, so it changed my view. I thought, wow, they've actually done a lot. And so part of the subtitle of the book, Walmart's Remarkable Transformation, was not composed casually. I think in the context of their own history, it's been a remarkable transformation. And then there is the other part, the limits of socially conscious capitalism, and the title itself, the main title, Still Broke, which I think points to where they and many other companies that are even embracing in their own way stakeholder capitalism and so on, where it falls short.
So I was struck in your book by the statistic that all of the wage increases at Walmart since 2015, they spent a total of $6 billion.
Yeah, $5 to $6 billion.
$5 to $6 billion,
Real
which
money.
sounds like a lot of money.
It is a lot.
But at the same time, they had stock buybacks worth $43 billion.
Correct.
So they pumped up their stock, which rewarded the stockholders, which rewarded the executives. The CEO makes more than $25 million a year.
Yeah.
The whole Walmart family are billionaires. What does that tell us?
Well, I think it tells you that both things can be true, which is to say, so Walmart, like many companies these days, right, they would tell you that they are practitioners of and fully embrace stakeholder capitalism, right? This is the term that, sort of really ascended in 2019 when the Business Roundtable, right, this organization made up of 200 or so of the most prominent CEOs in the country, right, went and specifically changed their kind of the purpose of a corporation statement from saying the purpose of a corporation was to maximize shareholder value. They didn't quite use those words, but that's what it said. And indeed, that first statement said that the interests of all other stakeholders those interests were derivative of the interests of shareholders. And then in 2019, right, they got a lot of positive attention for saying, no, we think that you have to balance the interests of all stakeholders, provide value to all stakeholders, including shareholders, certainly, but your customers and suppliers and the communities you operate in and your workers, and all of these need to be balanced. Walmart would say we've really embraced that. They talk about being a shared value company, if you follow Michael Porter's work, right, around shared value. Others call it conscious capitalism, whatever name you use. Is Walmart doing that? Yeah, they are. $5 to $6 billion worth of that for their workers over that period. But is shareholder primacy dead? Well, we're journalists, right? We just follow the money. So you say 5 to 6 billion over here, 43 billion over here. No, shareholder primacy isn't dead. And I think both things are happening at once.
So we all follow, the round table and all those CEOs got a lot of PR out of that talk about how they were going to, stakeholder capitalism, et cetera. But did they really walk the talk? And I think you got to look at, I'm just wondering, in your book you talk about how the entry-level wage is still $12 an hour, average wage is still $17 an hour, but there's hundreds of thousands of people work at Walmart and they get food stamps,
yeah.
And they're on Medicaid.
Yep.
What does that tell us?
Yeah, so, I came away with a few kind of big conclusions. So one of them is that, again, I don't think in some ways the problem is, that Walmart's evil. I think the problem largely is that, as a society, we've come to think that this is what good or good enough looks like, or, can look like, or should look like. The actions that Walmart took, again, they were positive. I think they can do much more. I think they should do much more. I think they can afford to raise wages. I've had conversations with the highest levels of the company about this. And so I don't want to let them off the hook. But I think that, what I came away feeling was like, this is a company that really, again, in their context of their own history, their industry, pressure from Wall Street, and all of it, they've made a turn. They've done some positive, good things. But what it showed me is this is a company in that context really trying. And they will never go far enough, fast enough, I think, for their own workers. And I think it's a symbol that, and a sign that corporate America will never go far enough, fast enough on its own to really fix what I describe in the book as nothing less than a wage crisis in this country. And I don't use that word crisis lightly. All the research suggests that somewhere between 25 and 40% of the US labor force, so you're talking 40 million to 65 million workers, people who get up every day, I think for the most part work really hard, and then they are often at the end of the month really struggling to make ends meet. And it may not be every month, but it is not uncommon, right? We know this, that they are making painful choices between paying rent or taking their medicine, right? Buying medicine, or putting enough food on their table for their kids, or heating their homes. Tens of millions of people face this all the time. And I think for those of us who are privileged, we've become invisible to this. For 5 minutes we woke up, we started calling these workers essential. Remember that? During the pandemic? No one, that's all washed out the window now. And so, I came to conclude, and what the end of the book really calls for, is a government-mandated living wage of no less than $20 an hour. And we can talk about why that number, but I think that's the only way this gets fixed. I think we've dug the hole so deep, the Walmarts are not going to fix this.
So $20 an hour would be a living wage in many places. And at the moment, Congress will not raise the minimum wage above $7.25.
Correct.
So let's say Walmart, $17 an hour is their average wage, $12 is their entry wage. You had some numbers in your book about how many Americans, live in a county where they would need $20 or $25.
So first of all, the standard I use is a family living wage. This is a widely accepted international standard. It's called the Anchor Standard, ANKER, if you want to look it up and dig deeper. But the idea is that for all kinds of public policy reasons, that a worker should be able to earn enough to support his or her family. And so this number of $20 an hour, so 80% of Americans live in a county where the family living wage is $20 an hour or higher. 40% of Americans live in a county where it's $25 an hour or higher. And I think in some places like LA, it would need to be substantially higher to be a true living wage. But it's and it's kind of has face validity, right? For a full-time worker, it's, a little over $40,000 a year. That kind of makes sense. And this is all calculated on the average size of a working family. Working adults in the U.S., it's about 1 3/4 full-time workers with 2 kids. That is the typical working family in the United States. That's what a family living wage with both earners earning that amount would support. And so that's why I landed on that number. I think it makes sense. We are certainly, I'm not a fool. We're not in a position politically to realize that at the moment, but I look at it like climate change. Again, we've dug this hole so deep over the past 50 years where wages have stagnated. We can't fix this incrementally anymore. $20 may sound crazy or radical, right? But what's radical to me is that tens of millions of people who serve us, who care for us, right, care for our loved ones when they're sick, do these really hard jobs, right, clean our offices, wait on us, do all these things, that they struggle the way they do, that they face those painful trade-offs that I described. That seems radical to me. And we can't incrementally fix this anymore.
So we have a situation where the Republicans in Congress are blocking any increase in the minimum wage. So are unions another solution to this problem? And we've seen what has been Walmart's stance when people have tried over the years to form a union so that workers could actually have a voice in what they're paid.
Yeah, so I call for a number of public policy solutions. The biggest and most straightforward one to me, again, is a government-mandated living wage. I think that there are labor law changes needed, both like the PRO Act to make traditional collective bargaining more possible than it is in the current environment, and as well as changes in labor law to provide for things like sectoral bargaining. Walmart, historically has been one of the most anti-union companies around. A lot of to the point, frankly, that the food and commercial workers, the union kind of jurisdiction that would organize their workers, has essentially given up trying to organize them. And even in the period that we've seen now, over the past year or so, with a flurry of union activity and some monumental wins for unions, certainly some headlines, lots of wins in the headlines. The UFCW, from what I know, is not trying to organize Walmart. It's too expensive, it's too hard. Walmart has proven too resistant over too long a period. And in fact, the playbook that you're seeing now from Starbucks and Amazon and all the others, as they fiercely resist unionization, despite a smattering of wins, and it really is just a smattering in the scheme of things, Walmart wrote that playbook, and you're just seeing it play out by others. And essentially that playbook is do whatever is necessary, legal or illegal, to beat back a union, to beat back organized labor.
They had 288 labor violations, Walmart did, where they were surveilling people who tried to firing
activists, all of it. And look, the price that companies pay is so tiny, literally in terms of the fines levied by the National Labor Relations Board or anything like that. It's certainly a lot cheaper to bear that than it is to come to the bargaining table and actually negotiate a contract, right?
Would unions be a terrible thing for Walmart? Would that really hurt the company to have?
Not in my view. Like most union busting companies, they say that unions are interlopers. They don't need any third party standing between them and their workers. There are plenty of avenues for worker voice. We know exactly what our employees think and so on. I think there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, but that's what they say. Just Howard Schultz says that, Amazon says that, they all say that. One thing that is notable, and I don't get into in the book, Walmart deals with unions all around the world. Right, they're an international company, and in other nations where unions are more the norm, if not the law, that they have to deal with a union, they do. And I would say the record's mixed in terms of, and mixed through different periods of time. Sometimes it's super adversarial and there's strikes and problems, and sometimes there's actually tons of cooperation and unions can help the company be more productive and more effective.
One of the interesting parts of your book is that when Walmart actually did raise its wage a bit, Wall Street went bananas.
Bananas, yeah.
So what happened there?
Yeah, so, it's pretty amazing, right? So first of all, the company believes, and I certainly believe, that this raising of wages has been an investment, right? It's an investment in workers and it's an investment in the company. The real reason, look, Walmart made this investment for all kinds of reasons. PR reasons, outside pressure reasons, right? From unions, from labor organizations like our Walmart, now called United for Respect, the interfaith community, politicians like Bernie Sanders, journalists like me, right? All kinds of pains on them. But fundamentally, this was a business operations decision. The company had cut its labor costs so much, they were really cutting into the bone. What happened was turnover accelerated, right? Workers, it was untenable to work there for so little under really not great working conditions, and then more people leave and you have even more things to do, and it's just a revolving door and it's a mess. Stores, were unclean. The shelves were not, being stocked properly. They needed to fix this. And so that was really the impetus for investing in workers, was to try and cut turnover and raise customer service and stop what was then kind of a nosedive in same-store sales year over year. They had just quarter after quarter of consecutive decline. And so Doug McMillon, now the CEO, then the new CEO came in and said, I'm going to invest. So that first year, they go from essentially a little over minimum wage to $9 and $10. When they announced it in February, the stock dipped a little. They then did their roadshow to Wall Street in the fall. I think it was in October of 2015. And what Wall Street had somehow missed, or the company hadn't communicated well, was that second year of the increase. I think they invested $1 billion the first year, and it would be $1.5 billion the second year. And the street had somehow missed the $1.5 billion the second year, and that was going to cut into earnings, an expected gain in earnings. It would actually be a decline in earnings in the short term. Again, in the long term, this is an investment that should grow both the top and bottom lines. But the street flipped out, massive sell-off. They announced a $20 billion stock repurchase that day. It did nothing to stop this, and the stock lost 10% of its value that day, in one day. $20 billion in market cap went poof like that.
But then they recovered.
It recovered,
right?
sure.
And so,
Yep.
So what is the business?
And their turnover is lower than it was. They would tell you that.
And sales went up, right?
Yep.
And turnover was
Yep.
much less, and they said they were able to hire much better quality people.
That is what they say.
So
imagine if they raised it to 20. What
that's
would
what
happen?
I was going to ask. What would be the business case for raising it even more?
Look, I make it in the book, but maybe a better voice than mine. Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever. Walmart talks a lot, as do a lot of grocery companies and retail chains and others that are in these low-paying industries, right? Our margins are so tight. We're doing the best we can, and look, we've really raised wages. We're doing the best. These are our margins. They're so thin. And I asked Paul Pullman, I said, man, am I being too hard on them? Their margins are so tight. And he kind of laughed. And he said, don't look at the margins. He said, don't believe him about it. Don't focus on margins. Focus on free cash flow. Now, I'm not a finance guy, so I'm Googling what is free cash flow. And then, I looked it up, and sure enough, Walmart's averaged $17.5 billion in free cash flow over the years. And, Paul's thing was they could afford $20 an hour. He said, look, why are the Waltons so rich? They're a cash cow. They could absolutely afford it. And he went on to say it's probably the best thing that they could do. They would continue to invest in those workers. Those workers would give back plenty by further investment in them and really getting them to a living wage. I will just say that Walmart, in closing, that Walmart has heard this argument from me. We've debated it, we've talked about it, and they will say, I'm oversimplifying things. It's not so easy to say, $5 to $6 billion in investment here, $43 billion in stock buybacks. You can't just take that money and put it over here. And you can't just take $17.5 billion a year in free cash flow and put it over here into workers. That I am, way oversimplifying things. Again, I'm not a finance guy. I am sure I am way oversimplifying things. I am also sure they are way overcomplicating things. Yeah.
I would just have one last question, which is to all the people in the audience. If they work for a company, if any of them work for a company, and they see inequality, they see workers who are on food stamps, they see wages much too low, what would be your advice for people as to what they should do about it? If, let's say they're in HR, let's say they're in middle management.
I'd say make sure the highest levels of the company, your CEO, knows that. I think often there's a real distance, a social distance that has grown between, look, all of us who are privileged, but really those in the C-suite. You're the CEO, you make $25 million a year. You know, you're so distant, right? We need a TV show called Undercover Boss so that people can actually go see the lived experience of their frontline workers. Like, right, it's really messed up. Leo Strine, who was the head of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Delaware, right, does all this business case law. Leo once said to me, you know, in the 60s, the CEO lived in the biggest house in town. They didn't live on another planet. And I think that social distance has grown so much. If you know that workers are really struggling, your frontline workers, those you may talk to or come across, or you know them, let the CEO know. I think sometimes, look, Dan Schulman at PayPal thought they were paying fine, they were paying at market rate. He did some investigating in this when he found out that some of his workers were going to food banks in Arizona and ended up raising pay across the company. And I've heard more than one story like this. Mark Bertolini, another one, when he ran Aetna, same thing. Did some investigating and was stunned to find that people in his call centers and billing operation were on food stamps and Medicaid, and was appalled. And I'm thinking, you're paying them whatever, $14 an hour. Of course they're on Medicaid and food stamps. But there's such a distance. I think it's like an empathy gap or a lived experience gap. Close that gap by letting people know and then seeing how they respond.
Thank you, Rick. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for being
Thanks
here.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good.